The call came on a Sunday morning while I was standing in the back of a church I hadn't visited in almost a year. My husband had loved this place. He used to drag me out of bed every Sunday, pour coffee into a travel mug, and say, "10 minutes, sweetheart. God can wait 10 minutes for your mascara, but not 11. I always laughed. I always made him wait 12. He'd been gone for 8 months when I finally made myself go back. I thought it would help. I thought sitting in the third pew from the left, the one we always chose because he said the acoustics were better there, would make me feel close to him again. Instead, I just felt like I was suffocating in a room full of people who kept looking at me with that specific kind of pity that makes you want to apologize for still being alive. So I slipped out during the second hymn and stood in the hallway near the water fountain, staring at my phone like it was something I'd forgotten how to use. That's when it rang. The number was local, but I didn't recognize it. I almost didn't answer. "Mrs. Bryda." "Calloway?" The voice on the other end was a man's, and something in it made me straighten up immediately. Not panic exactly, more like the feeling right before you realize the car in front of you has stopped suddenly. That fraction of a second where your body knows before your brain does. "This is Kevin Marsh. I'm the contractor your sister-in-law brought in to check the water damage in your husband's study. I'm sorry to bother you on a Sunday, ma'am, but I need you to come to the house. Right now, if you can, to the house. Right now, if you can." I pressed the phone harder against my ear. "Is something wrong? Is there a problem with the Mrs. Calloway?" His voice dropped. "I need you to come alone. Please don't bring anyone with you, and don't tell anyone where you're going." I was already walking toward the parking lot. My husband, Patrick, had died 8 months earlier of a cardiac event. That's what they wrote on the paperwork, cardiac event. 2 words that told you nothing and everything at the same time. He was 41 years old. He ran 5 miles 3 times a week. He ate salmon and hated butter and always ordered his coffee black because he said anything else was dessert, pretending to be a beverage. He had no history of heart disease, no warning signs. He was fine on a Tuesday and gone by Wednesday morning. We had been married for 6 years. We had a house with a study where he kept books. He'd already read twice, and a coffee maker that only he knew how to operate properly. We had a joint account and a shared login for the streaming service and a drawer full of takeout menus, even though we both knew we only ever ordered from 2 places. We had a future, and then we didn't. His sister Lydia had been managing Patrick's small investment consulting firm for the 2 years before he died. He brought her in when his previous office manager left, and at the time it seemed like a natural solution. She was organized. She was detail-oriented. She had a business degree and a very confident way of talking about things she was not always confident about. I had tried to like her. I want to be honest about that. I tried for 6 years and I never quite got there, but I tried. After Patrick died, Lydia stepped into the business with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. She handled everything: the accounts, the clients, the paperwork, the transition. She told me I didn't need to worry about any of it. She said Patrick had wanted her to manage the transition. She said he had told her so. I believed her because I was grieving and I was 32 years old and I had never run a business and I didn't know what else to do. That was my first mistake. Kevin Marsh was waiting for me on the front porch when I pulled into the driveway. He was in his mid-50s with the kind of weathered face that comes from decades of outdoor work, and he was holding his hat in both hands the way men do when they're about to say something they'd rather not say. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. "What's going on? You said water damage. I need to show you something." He held open the front door. "I found it about an hour ago. I've been trying to decide what to do, and I kept coming back to the same answer, which is that you need to know." Patrick's study was at the back of the house, past the kitchen and down a short hallway. It had been his favorite room. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk that had belonged to his grandfather, a window that looked out onto the backyard where we planted a dogwood tree the spring after we moved in. The water damage had been Lydia's discovery, or so she'd told me. She'd come to the house 2 weeks earlier to pick up some files and noticed a stain spreading along the baseboard behind Patrick's desk. She'd arranged for Kevin to come in and assess it. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Kevin led me to the far wall, the one behind the built-in shelving unit. Someone, Kevin, had pulled the shelving unit away from the wall. It swung out like a door. I hadn't known it could do that. Patrick had never mentioned it. Behind it was a small rectangular panel set into the wall about the size of a large hardcover book. It was made of metal and it had a combination lock. The water damage was real, Kevin said. There was a leak in the pipe behind this wall. That's what I was brought in to fix. But when I opened up the drywall to get to the pipe, I found this. He paused. The thing is, Mrs. Calloway, someone had already been at it. I looked at him. What do you mean? The drywall had been patched and repainted recently. Very recently. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. Matched the paint, smoothed the seams. If there hadn't been a water leak that forced me to cut further into the wall, I never would have noticed. But when I saw the patch, I looked more carefully, and I found scratches on the lock. Fresh ones, like someone had been trying to get into this thing without knowing the combination. I reached out and touched the metal panel. It was cold under my fingers. "Do you know the combination?" he asked. I stood there looking at it for a long moment. Patrick's grandfather's desk. The dogwood tree we planted together. 6 years of a life built with someone. I thought about the first number that came to me, and then the second, and then the third. The date we met. I dialed it in. The panel clicked open. Inside there were 3 things: a USB drive, a sealed envelope with my name on it and Patrick's handwriting, and a small leather notebook. My hands were shaking when I took them out. Kevin stepped back. "I'll give you a minute," he said quietly. He went out to the hallway and closed the door behind him. I sat down on the floor. I'm not sure why, I just needed to be closer to the ground somehow, and I opened the envelope first. Patrick had written 4 pages in the careful, precise handwriting I'd spent 6 years teasing him about because it looked like he'd been trained by monks. He had dated it 11 months before he died. I won't repeat everything he wrote. Some of it was private in a way that still belongs only to me. But here's what matters. Patrick had discovered roughly 14 months before his death that Lydia had been systematically siphoning money from his client accounts. Small amounts at first, the kind that get lost in rounding errors and quarterly adjustments, then larger ones disguised as vendor payments and operational expenses to companies that, when Patrick looked closely, did not actually exist. He had also discovered that she had taken out a personal loan against one of the firm's assets using a document that bore his signature, a signature he had not written. He wrote that he had confronted her privately, that she had cried, that she had told him she was in serious debt. She didn't say to whom, but Patrick suspected gambling. That she had promised to pay back every dollar, that he had given her 6 months. She had paid back almost nothing. He wrote that he had been preparing to take everything to an attorney. He had the documentation on the USB drive. He had arranged a meeting. He wrote that he was ashamed it had taken him this long and that he was sorry for not protecting what was ours sooner. The meeting had been scheduled for a Thursday. He died on a Wednesday. I sat on the floor of his study for a long time after I finished reading. I did not call Lydia. I did not call anyone in Patrick's family. I did not go to the police that day, though every instinct I had was screaming at me to do exactly that. Instead, I called the one person I knew I could trust to tell me what to do next without telling anyone else I'd done it. My college roommate's husband was a corporate attorney named Stephen Ware. I had met him at their wedding, watched him navigate a spectacularly contentious rehearsal dinner disagreement with the calm of someone defusing a bomb, and thought, that is a useful man to know. I had his number in my phone, but I had never used it for anything except a birthday text 2 years ago. He answered on the second ring on a Sunday without any irritation in his voice at all. I told him everything. He let me talk without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Don't touch anything else in that room," he said. "Don't tell Lydia you found the panel. Don't mention the USB to anyone. Can you bring me the drive and the letter tomorrow morning?" "Yes." "Does she have a key to the house?" I thought about it. She might. Patrick may have given her one. "Change your locks tonight. All of them. Don't use a service she might recognize. Call a locksmith your family has never used." He paused. "And, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about Patrick. This is going to be hard. But I want you to know you did exactly the right thing by calling me first." I sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes before I drove to the hardware store. The dogwood tree in the backyard had started to bud. Patrick had picked it because he said dogwoods were tough. They looked delicate, but they could survive almost anything. I thought he had been talking about the tree. What Stephen found on that USB drive over the following 2 weeks was more extensive than even Patrick's letter had suggested. There were spreadsheets, there were wire transfer records, there were scanned copies of documents bearing Patrick's forged signature, not just the loan, but 2 amended client contracts and a letter of authorization that would have given Lydia expanded access to the firm's operating accounts. Stephen brought in a forensic accountant, a quiet woman named Dr. Okafor, who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the manner of someone who had seen every variety of human dishonesty and found none of it surprising anymore. She went through the records methodically and came back 10 days later with a figure. The number was substantial, more than I had known the firm was worth, which meant Lydia had also been inflating the firm's reported value on documents that had affected decisions I had made about the estate. I had signed things I should not have signed, not because I was stupid, but because I had trusted someone I should not have trusted at a time when I was not in a condition to be skeptical of anything. Stephen was careful not to say "I told you so," because he had never told me so, but I could see him making note of it, the way grief had been used as a tool against me, deliberately and with patience. "She knew you wouldn't look closely at anything in the first few months," he said. "She knew exactly how long that window would stay open." I thought about Lydia at Patrick's funeral, how efficient she had been, how she had handled the reception and the catering and the flowers and the guest book, how I had been grateful to her for it. I thought about a lot of things differently after that conversation. Confronting Lydia was not what I expected it to be. Stephen had advised me not to do it at all, to let the legal process run its course, to keep my distance, to give her no indication that anything had changed. And I had agreed with him genuinely. I had sat in his office and nodded and understood the strategy. And then she called me on a Tuesday evening and told me, in a voice of great warmth and sisterly concern, that she was thinking about transferring some of the firm's remaining assets into a new holding structure for tax purposes and just needed me to sign a few documents. I said I'd have to check with my attorney first. There was a pause. "Your attorney?" she said. "Since when do you have an attorney?" "Since my husband died," I said. "Goodbye, Lydia." I hung up and called Stephen before she could call me back. He was unsurprised. He had, it turned out, been anticipating exactly this move. He had already drafted the letters. Lydia's own attorney received the first one 3 days later. It detailed the findings and requested a settlement conference. It mentioned, specifically, the forensic accounting report, the forged signatures, the non-existent vendor entities, and the timing of the amended documents relative to Patrick's death. Lydia did not respond for 11 days. When she finally did, through her attorney, she characterized the money as loans she had intended to repay, and the signature irregularities as the result of Patrick having given her verbal authorization that had simply not been properly documented. Patrick had been very specific in his letter about what verbal authorizations he had and had not given. Stephen was very specific in his response about what the documentation actually showed. The settlement took 4 months to finalize. I won't pretend it was clean or quick or emotionally simple, because it was none of those things. There were weeks when I couldn't sleep, and weeks when I slept too much, and one afternoon when I sat in my car outside the mediator's office and cried for 20 minutes before I could go inside. But here's what happened by the end of it. Lydia signed a repayment agreement for the full amount identified by Dr. Okafor to be paid out over 36 months with interest. She relinquished all remaining claim to any role in Patrick's firm. She signed a statement, carefully worded, legally binding, acknowledging that certain documents had been executed without proper authorization. She did not go to prison. That is the part I have made my peace with, though it took me longer than I expected. Stephen explained the practical calculus of it. Civil versus criminal, burden of proof, the cost of a trial I might not win even with everything we had. I understood it intellectually before I understood it in my chest. What I have come to believe is that the penalty she carries now is not the money, it's the knowing. She knows what Patrick found. She knows that I know. She knows that somewhere in a metal box behind a wall he installed himself, he had anticipated her, had gathered the evidence quietly, had planned to stop her, had written my name on an envelope and told me exactly what she was. He just ran out of time. I still go to church sometimes, though not every Sunday. I still sit in the third pew from the left. The acoustics are better there, I've tested it. The firm was formally dissolved 6 months after the settlement. It was the right decision. Patrick had built it, and without Patrick, it was just a name and a set of accounts and the memory of something that used to matter. The dogwood tree bloomed this spring. It does that. Looks like it's doing nothing all winter, and then suddenly, without any announcement, it's covered in white flowers. Patrick would have said something annoyingly apt about that. He had a habit of finding metaphors in ordinary things, which I used to find charming and occasionally, when I was tired, a little much. I miss it now. I miss it now. I miss it more than I can say. Kevin Marsh sent me a card after the story got out. Some of it made the local business pages, anonymized but recognizable to anyone who knew the parties. He wrote that he was glad he called me instead of Lydia when he found that panel. He wrote that something had told him to. I wrote back and told him I was glad too, that it had made all the difference. There's something I have thought about almost every day since that Sunday morning in the church hallway. Patrick scheduled his attorney meeting for a Thursday. He died on a Wednesday. He had been living with this knowledge for over a year, the betrayal, the evidence, the decision about what to do, and he had carried it carefully and deliberately and quietly, the way he carried most things. He had also, at some point during that year, built a hidden compartment in the wall of his study, dialed in the combination to the date we first met, and put inside it everything I would need. He didn't know he was going to die. He built it as a precaution, but it reads, looking back, like something else. Like someone who loved you, making absolutely sure that even in the worst version of events, you would not be left alone in the dark. I think about that a lot. I think about the kind of love that plans for its own absence, that prepares you, not for the future it expects, but for the one it fears. I don't have a tidy way to end this. There is no moment where the grief stopped and the clarity began. It's more complicated and more gradual than that, and anyone who tells you differently is selling you something. What I can tell you is that I know now what was behind the wall, and I know that he put it there for me. I've thought a lot about what it actually means to be betrayed by someone you tried to love. Not the dramatic version of it, not the movie version where you see it coming and you have a speech prepared. The real version, which is quieter and slower and much more humiliating than anyone warns you about. The real version is that you sign documents you don't read closely because you're exhausted from grief and you trust the person handing you the pen. The real version is that you say thank you to someone who is robbing you because you can't tell the difference between kindness and strategy when you're still learning how to sleep alone. Lydia counted on that. She had done the math on my grief and decided it gave her a workable window. That's the part I had to sit with the longest. Not the forgery, not the stolen money, but the deliberateness of it. She had looked at me in the weeks after Patrick's funeral and seen opportunity. She had planned around my pain like it was a variable she could factor in. What I understand now on the other side of all of it is that the choices people make reveal exactly who they are. Not in the big dramatic moments, in the quiet ones, when no one is watching, when they believe the math is in their favor. Lydia made her choices across months and years, one transaction at a time, each one small enough to justify and large enough to compound. That's how it works. Dishonesty doesn't usually arrive as a single catastrophic decision. It's a habit. It grows in the space between what you know is wrong and what you convince yourself you can get away with. And the thing about that kind of choice is that it doesn't stay contained. It spreads into everything. It turns a family into a transaction. It turns grief into a tool. It turns the memory of someone you loved into cover for what you're doing behind their name. Patrick knew that. I think that's why he couldn't let it go. Not because of the money, though the money was real and the harm was real, but because of what it meant. Because allowing it to continue would have meant accepting a version of the world where the people closest to you could be trusted least of all. He wasn't built for that. He believed that how you treat people when it costs you something is the only measure that matters. He was right, and the evidence he left me, carefully documented, quietly assembled, locked behind a combination only I would know, was the last and most complete expression of who he was. It was intelligence applied in service of integrity. It was the act of someone who understood that doing the right thing sometimes means preparing for the worst version of events and doing the work anyway, even when you're running out of time. I think about that when the settlement feels inadequate or the process feels unfair or I'm tired and I just want it to have been simpler than it was. I think about the kind of person who does the hard, unglamorous work of documentation and evidence and careful planning, not for recognition, not for a confrontation, but because it was right. Because someone needed to. That's what I try to carry forward. Not the anger, which was real and necessary for a while and then started to cost more than it was worth. Not even the grief, which will always be there in some form and which I stopped trying to resolve into something neater than it is. What I try to carry forward is the standard, the refusal to look away from what's true because looking is inconvenient, the willingness to do the work that honesty requires even when no one is making you. Patrick built that box in the wall because he loved me. He also built it because he was, at his core, someone who believed that the truth deserved to be protected. I'm still learning how to be that person. But I'm learning,